Coming up on this edition of the Black Vault Radio, the founder of the CanAm Missing Project and the author of the Missing 411 line of books, Mr. David Paulides, steps into the vault. He explores the tragic and emotional circumstances behind mysterious disappearances of people in the wild. He dives into how the U.S. government may be neglecting some very important pieces of evidence that may help solve these mysteries.
Well, also right next to this, they found one tooth sitting on top of a log next to the clothes. People have this attitude that when you're in the wilderness, it must be a safe playground. Now understand the scenario, John. You're in the middle of a wilderness area, nobody's around, and you got this little 3-4-year-old kid that walks up on you. Law enforcement agencies don't do well with the unknown. Mm-hmm. They don't want to address it, and they never want to say to the public, we don't understand it, or this is confusing. They always want to look like they're in charge.
All that and much more. So stay tuned. The Black Vault Radio is about to begin. More than 20 years ago, I began a journey. My quest for the truth. My name is John Greenewald, and I have hammered the United States government with Freedom of Information Act requests trying to get answers. I have more than 2 million pages of declassified documents for you to download at theblackvault.com. Now, I attempt to dive even deeper and talk to some of the most brilliant minds on this planet. No government secret is off limits, and no question is off the table. All I aim for is the truth. This is the Black Vault Radio. That's right, everybody. This is another edition of the Black Vault Radio. I am your host, John Greenewald Jr. Thank you so much for tuning in and making this your podcast radio show of choice, at least for the next couple of hours anyway. I really do appreciate all of your feedback every week. I have a lot of fun making the show, as I've mentioned before. The guests are a lot of fun. I get to pick brains of people that sometimes I've known for years, other times I just meet for the show. Either way, it's a lot of fun for me, so thank you for all your feedback. It means a lot. If you do want to write in, feel free to do so. You can email me directly at contact, C-O-N-T-A-C-T, at theblackvault.com. Contact at theblackvault.com. That'll come to me, and let me know what you think. Also, don't be shy. Feel free to add those reviews to iTunes and all of those other places that you might be streaming this. It's been picked up on quite a few more places that I didn't even submit it to, so that's kind of a fun feeling. Show is definitely growing when it comes to the amount of downloads. That is all thanks to you, so thank you for that. I really do appreciate it. This is going to be a fun show as well. We've got David Paulides coming up. David just recently released his 8th book in the Missing 411 series. Now, I have that book right next to me here. I'm excited to bring him on. He is talking about all things mysterious disappearances in the wild. He focuses his research on finding people, both men and women, going out into the wilderness, into the wild, and mysteriously disappearing. Now, what's interesting is, because gut reactions may say, well, people make mistakes, they're not educated about the outback and the wild, they're not experienced, they make silly mistakes, or they get eaten by bears or mountain lions. And what David does is he focuses in on those cases that cannot be explained away like that. And I have not only known David for a long time, seen him lecture quite a few times. And it's a very powerful topic just simply because you do have that human emotion behind everything. You do have the fact that people in some cases, in many cases, in these types of scenarios, it doesn't end well, that they end up dying. So it's a very sensitive topic, of course, controversial to say the least, but he has spent thousands upon thousands of hours, literally, over the years, going through these cases and whittling them down to show that something is going on. What is it? What could it be? Well, that's coming up. I'm going to start picking David's brain on what he thinks is really going on, and we'll dive into some of those cases and obviously his newest book in the Missing 411 series. Everything that we talk about on the show is linked to the show notes page. If you haven't listened in, every episode is broken down at www.theblackvault.com/show notes. Now, you are listening to episode number 14. We've got a growing number of episodes here. All of them are available to you for free. Feel free to log on to that page. It'll break down every single episode, guest links, their web pages, books, how to order, any documents we talk about, any shreds of evidence, whatever it might be of interest, it is linked there. Now, one thing I want to talk about before we get to headlines and then later to David Paulides. You have written into me quite a bit, many people have, about the announcement of my letter to the Stars Academy. In the beginning, it was letters of support. There was a small fraction. In fact, I can count them on one hand. Small fraction of people that, of course, had their choice words for me. I was intrigued and fairly excited by the fact that I could count them on one hand. I expected a lot of heat for that letter. If you don't know what the heck I'm talking about, To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, led by Tom DeLong, was announced about a year ago, almost to the date of me recording this episode. That is just a coincidence. Literally, a year ago, almost to the date, it was announced. A couple months later, in December of 2017, one of the To the Stars Academy board members, I guess, I don't want to say employee, but board member, Mr. Luis Elizondo, was entwined in a story about what was labeled as the Pentagon's secret UFO study. Now, I was pretty intrigued in October, let alone December of 2017, when all of this hit the headlines and received an avalanche of coverage. It really did. Now, I'm always connected and drawn to stories that deal with the United States government and UFOs. And the reason why I feel so connected to those stories is I've devoted 22 years of my life, literally now, researching it. So what draws me to those stories is the fact that now you've got a guy out there claiming to be the head of a program that dealt with UFOs. Hey, I'm all over that. That's awesome. It's a great story, even though I do have now, fast forward here to October of 2018, do have quite a few reservations, red flags, and questions. It's still a great story. I'd love to sit down, have a beer with Mr. Elizondo, and just chat with him. Heck, I won't even mention UFOs. We don't even have to talk about ATIP. I think he and I would probably get along really well, despite what some people might think. But on top of that, just have a lot to chat about. I'd love to talk to the guy. That being said, through the following, quite a few months, I started researching the claims made by To the Stars. Now, I'm not going to rehash everything again. I've talked about it a little bit here on the air. I'm still playing with, I mentioned it last episode, I'm still playing with, should I do a full episode and just yammer on to those who care about it, talk about all of the different documents that have or have not come out that surround this story. Maybe a little bit brutally detailed, but some of you, I know, actually a lot of you, based on your letters, are really into that. That all of us, me included, are getting sick and tired of people making a claim about something, but never actually backing it up. Now, that was the root of my letter to the Stars. For 4 months, I tried to get an interview or sit down with Mr. Elizondo just to chat, either recorded or not, to answer some of these unanswered questions. And that there's quite a few of them in no particular order. Just the name of the program is controversial right now. Sounds like semantics, but Mr. Elizondo says one name, which has aerospace in it, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Pentagon tells me in writing, they're the actually only ones that are returning my call, that no, that's not the real program name. It's actually Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program. Now, again, semantics, kind of, but it's still important because you got a guy who claims to have had the program, and yet he's got the name wrong. Now, I'm not making that accusation. Let me be clear. I just want clarification. It is very well possible that the government is lying to me. Then my question shifts. It shifts from why do you have the name wrong to why do you think the government is lying? Either question is very important in this debate. I can't get them on the phone to ask either one. The Pentagon, however, is the one that actually is returning my calls and returning emails. Be that as it may, again, quite a few different red flags. I'm not going to get into all of them. I was just on Jimmy Church a couple weeks ago, and I really kind of dissected quite a few of what was going on in my mind of what the red flags were. So I had published a open letter invitation. I was eventually denied any interview, even access to Mr. Elizondo. They just pretty much said no after 4 months of waiting. I mean, that's a long time. You shouldn't string somebody along that long. And it wasn't just as an appearance on this podcast, by the way, because some of you might say, well, who the heck are you to write them and have them respond? I don't disagree with you. I'm nobody. However, I was working on a television series for a major television network. I do have a background in television, and I was working on one when I was trying to get that interview. So it wasn't only for my own personal curiosity, but in the interest of openness, I was trying to, and I mentioned this to them, trying to get them major media coverage in the form of a documentary that I was currently working on at the time. And it would be a network that you would recognize. Why am I not naming it? Well, because we can't talk about certain things until they air or are announced, and this particular project is neither. So that being said, my job obviously came and went on that particular show. I'm a freelancer, so I do production and writing and consulting work on a semi-regular basis, depending upon what is called for. And so I have moved on from that project. I got the official no, and fast forward to about a month ago. And so I published this open letter, raised some issues, but more so I was saying that people either on the board, and I named one specifically, or very closely connected to the Stars Academy are disseminating false information. And I'm here to say, because you've all written in, just to kind of cut to the chase, I have not received a single official response from To the Stars Academy at all. No acknowledgement, no go away, no keep your mouth shut, no we'd love to do it, nothing. Okay? I was going to let the issue die. I wasn't going to speak about it anymore. It is what it is. Like I said a couple minutes ago, who am I? I'm really not anybody. I did try and offer a platform for them. The Black Vault serves around 16 to 22,000 people every day to the website. That is why the podcast that you're listening to is growing fairly quickly because of that audience, and I'm excited about that. That is a wide range of an average, I know, but the reason is because the Black Vault gets various media attention, so on the higher end is usually on those days. Television appearances will spike that number to 40, 50, 60,000 people in a 24-hour period and beyond. So it all depends on that. That's why there's kind of a rough average there. Now, that being said, I was trying to offer that platform. I do have a lot of pride in what I have built in 22 years, and the traffic is evidence that I must be doing something right in respect that I just don't start making claims and not back things up. And when people do, and they kind of encroach on the territory of UFO/government involvement, not that that's my territory, but when they go into that realm and they make claims, since I've worked so hard to make sure that the media gets the correct information. When I produce for companies like the History Channel, Discovery Channel, National Geographic Channel, all of networks that I have worked for and with, both on camera and behind the scenes as a producer and writer, I want to make sure that they get the best information possible. So when people make claims, they don't back it up. I have issue with that. Well, like I said, I was going to let the issue die. I spoke my piece. I wrote the letter. I did it in an open forum just simply because I wanted you all to read a little bit about my concern as well. Well, let's fast forward now to just the last few days. I talked about a document from the National Security Agency, the last episode, about Mother Teresa. This has nothing to do with UFOs, nothing to do with ATIP, nothing to do with To the Stars Academy, nothing to do with anything related to the paranormal. The Black Vault primarily deals with non-UFO related material. You may not believe that, but I would say probably 95% of my archive of the 2 million pages, approximately, that's off the top of my head, but I mean, it's a very large percentage that does not deal with UFOs at all. UFOs is just definitely the most popular with the general public. Well, lo and behold, on this post that I put on my personal wall on Facebook, also the Black Vault fan page and the Black Vault group, and actually I think that's it on Facebook, the name Dr. Eric Davis shows up to comment on this particular post. Now, if you don't know who Dr. Eric Davis is, he is the man that appears in the Adam Project video with Dr. Hal Puthoff, and they are looking at, some kind of evidence, we think. It's all blurred, and, we can't really understand what's going on. But that being said, he's one of the gentlemen that is in that video. Smart guy. I'm not going to insult him. He's a smart guy when it comes to science. He's published quite a few papers. He's done other government contracts before. That's all proven. I've even got some of his reports through the Freedom of Information Act. So he is who he says in that regard, but he pops up on my post and he says the following. Now, before I read it, I want to just stress a couple of points. I've never spoken to Dr. Davis before. We have never been connected on social media ever. We're not friends in the real life, nor in the digital realm, meaning it's not like we don't talk, but we're connected as friends on Facebook. Somehow he decides to go to my personal page and make a comment. And he comments on the Mother Teresa post, and he says the following. John remains naive about how the classification and FOIA systems work. The latter was never designed to be user-friendly, nor is it well-funded and staffed at all federal agencies, offices, and departments. There is a quiet little provision that allows FOIA officers to place requests in a permanent FOIA circular file that behaves like an infinite do loop. Requests that go in never get answered. All right, that's the end of the quote. Now, I did respond. I'm not going to go ahead and give the full response over the air, not because I'm hiding it. It's just rather lengthy, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But essentially, I wrote back, and I said, this is exactly why I mentioned you in my letter. Now, To the Stars Academy did not even have the courtesy to respond at all in a month. All right? That's fine. That is what it is. I'll let it go. At this point, I just don't care. It's kind of like beating a dead horse. If they're going to respond, great. We'll take the next step. Since they're not, I don't care anymore. I'll just continue to do my work under the FOIA, and we'll let the documents speak for themselves, right? Yet this guy shows up, calls me naive, says I don't know what's going on, and then doubles down and just makes up something. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because I don't like to air dirty laundry. I'm bringing it up as an education moment. Not to make To the Stars look bad, but obviously, in my opinion anyway, it's like they're sanctioning this at this point. They're aligning themselves with people like Dr. Davis or Dr. Davis himself, and he's going out there and he is literally misinforming the public. Now, why do I say that? He calls it a quiet little provision that allows FOIA officers to place requests in a permanent FOIA circular file. That is just downright not true. In 22 years, I have filed over 9,000 Freedom of Information Act requests. I am not saying that I know more or less than anyone else, but what I am saying is that after 9,000 cases, there is not one single example that I can give you that proves what Dr. Davis is saying. United States Code, Chapter 5, Section 552, is what's called the Freedom of Information Act. Agencies on every federal level, with the exception of two places, and that's a different topic, but the White House and NORAD, because it's under Canadian control. The White House is not subject because it is kind of overridden by the Presidential Records Act. And so the Presidential Records Act will allow the presidential records to be exempt while they're in office. Then they are transferred over to the National Archives. Then they are subject to FOIA after they are out of office in 4 or 8 years. There is no anything that will overwrite or void out that United States Code. Nothing. In addition to the United States Code, every federal agency has and military branch, by the way, has a internal FOIA procedural manual. What this does is it informs those personnel working at that particular agency on how to comply with that written United States Code, Chapter 5, Section 552, the Freedom of Information Act. Compliance with that act is mandatory. That says you need a response within 10 to 20 working business days. You need one. You can't put it into a circular file. Now, let me give Dr. Davis the benefit of the doubt. Well, they respond once to you and then let it go indefinitely. They can't. There are checks and balances systems in place to allow us as FOIA requesters to then start appealing when it goes an insane amount of time. In fact, you can start appealing rather quickly. Now, with agency backlogs, they are backlogged. Sometimes it takes a few years. My record is 14 and a half years. Is that ridiculous? Absolutely. Does the FOIA have shortcomings? Absolutely. Are there things that I would change about it? Absolutely. But let's be accurate. And Dr. Davis, on my wall, calling me naive, trying to insult me, is just misinforming the public. Now, is this an attack on him? Absolutely not. The reason why I bring this up is a little bit of more of an education point, meaning to let you guys know, don't believe stuff like that. The Freedom of Information Act works. A few episodes ago, I had Nate Jones on the show. We talked a lot about the FOIA and how it works and how he handles it at the National Security Archive. I have a lot of respect for him on the FOIA level, not only on a personal basis, but in his knowledge of the FOIA. He is yet another example. Don't take my word for it. The FOIA works. There's no circular file at all. This is why I wrote that open letter. This is why he was named specifically. If To the Stars Academy wants to align themselves with people that are just honestly not only insulting the public, I personally don't care. I've been called a lot worse than naive, so that's less of my point. But if To the Stars wants to sanction the insulting nature of the people they align with towards people like me that are trying to get answers, we're not trying to make people look bad, trying to get answers. By the way, Dr. Davis, in writing in a public forum, which is why I'm bringing it up, called some other bloggers that are writing about these types of topics months ago idiots. And I mentioned this specifically in my letter. Because they started asking questions, he was calling them idiots. That's all silly, dirty laundry stuff that I don't want to talk about. But when people not only sling the insults, and then they make up stuff about the Freedom of Information Act and documents, and then give the aura that we are all in the dark and they are in the know, that they're the only ones that truly know what's going on, that's red flag number 1 through 140. Because anybody who wants to just keep touting, number 1, false information, but number 2, then tell you that they're the only ones that really know what's going on, turn the other direction and run away. Trust me, in 22 years, I've seen that quite a few times in the field of UFOs. And honestly, they are just doing the same thing that I have seen time and time again. I've lost interest in trying to help, even though my invitation stays open to the Stars Academy. And I'm sure some of you will probably read Dr. Eric Davis's comment and comment on it yourself. Just so he knows, that open invitation, the letter that I sent to the Stars, included him. That if he wanted to come on this, I will be more than happy to talk about the Freedom of Information Act, to talk about his secret little provision that he talked about, and see if what he really says is true. There is zero evidence for it, and I guarantee the fact that he just calls it a quiet little provision means that he has nothing to reference. But be that as it may, I will stand corrected and issue an apology to you all if all of that is correct, and there is something that out of 9,000 cases going after the most ridiculously classified material out there, speaking for myself, and I don't have a single example of that, I highly doubt it's true. On top of that, there is nothing that can overwrite that United States Code. There is nothing that can go against all of those internal agency procedural manuals, many of which are public, and they all say that compliance with the FOIA is absolutely mandatory. And on top of that, you can't let them go indefinitely. I wanted to make sure that all of you guys knew a little bit more about that false information that's out there and the reality behind what really is going on. Coming up, David Paulides in the TBV Dialogue segment. But before we bring him on, we're going to deal with some headlines that you may or may not have missed on TBV News. In this episode's TBV News segment, the segment of the show where I speak just about a few headlines that you may or may not have missed since our last show, I want to start with a little bit of history. Now, I wish I could find, at least by the recording of this, who actually got the documents. However, it was reported by the New York Times. It's very possible that they were the ones to receive it. Many times networks or journalists / newspapers, when they profile Freedom of Information Act documents, they do so from other researchers. And I always like to give credit to the researchers, which are largely unsung in some of these articles. Sadly, I couldn't really find it on this particular one. But be that as it may, the New York Times ran a story, headline, U.S. General Considered Nuclear Response in Vietnam War Cable Show. Now, recently declassified were some top secret documents. One that authorized something called Operation Fractured Jaw. And what this was General William Westmoreland, who was the commander in Vietnam in the later 60s. He authorized himself to move nuclear weapons from the United States all the way over to Vietnam. The idea was that once the president gave the order, they were going to be able to deploy these nuclear records right away and launch a nuclear attack in Vietnam. Now, of course, this would have definitely sparked World War III, in my opinion. Be that as it may, this is what he wanted to do. The president was tipped off. Another declassified document shows that Johnson was tipped off, and they essentially said, cancel everything. Do not even think about doing Operation Fractured Jaw. And General Westmoreland was kind of put in his place in that respect. But it is amazing that declassified documents, 40 plus, 45 plus years after the fact, surface to show just what goes on behind the scenes. We know kind of the end product of Vietnam. We know that, it didn't go incredibly well. But really, we're learning that this could have sparked, with one nuclear detonation, World War III. Amazing what declassified documents show. And on top of that, amazing to see how long they take to actually come out. So I wish, again, by the recording of this, who I could credit. But at this point, it looks like maybe it was the New York Times. They did the FOIA. They got these things declassified. If I am wrong on that, I am sorry to any of the researchers that actually did the legwork and got those declassified and later profiled by New York Times. Moving on, one topic that I love talking about is artificial intelligence and the leaps and bounds, literal leaps, that are being made by Boston Dynamics. Now, if you don't know what Boston Dynamics is, they're the company that when you see a robot, albeit a dog-looking robot walking up a hill or down a hill, or Atlas, which is the one that has legs, looks more human-like with 2 arms, 2 legs, and so on. They're the ones that are doing this research and making this all possible. This week, another video appeared of the bipedal robot known as Atlas. And this time, this freaky-looking thing is jumping, running, and even going up multiple stairs with ease. Now, why do I love this topic? Well, I think I've brought it up in the past, but I'll bring it up again because it's definitely worthwhile. I was able to produce a show for the Universe on History Channel, and I did a lot of research on if we make contact with alien life, because this was the premise of the show, what would it look like? And most of the scientists that I spoke with said artificial intelligence, that they would be a silicon-based machine versus a biological carbon-based being like humans. So if we were to make contact, because again, according to scientists, we haven't yet, and that's another debate, it would be with this machine. And I'm telling you that doing that show, and that's why I bring it up probably now a couple times. I'm sorry if I don't recall if I brought it up on the show or not, but it's just an amazing topic. So as we make these progressions, and these robots are now doing things that are very, very human-like, when you couple that to an artificial intelligence software system, meaning you put a CPU that's very, very powerful within that robot, and you put software on there that allows that robot to start to think for themselves and make decisions, you have a very scary scenario. Terminator then becomes less of a movie and more of a documentary, in my opinion. And working on that show for History Channel, and then later I did another one for Discovery on that very topic, man, it really is a mind-blowing concept to try and wrap your mind around. And in many ways, you just can't. Because when you start thinking like a computer and seeing what they can and can't do, and then you allow them to think for themselves, the minute then you get artificial intelligence software to surpass the human mind, things happen very, very quickly. If you give it a CPU powerful enough, what's crazy about artificial intelligence is you don't need to make it perfect, right? You don't need to do any of that. You just have to get it to a point that allows it to learn. And with software, that's not too difficult to do, especially nowadays. And the minute a robot can learn and start to teach itself, it can then start to program itself and make it better. It can actually then learn how to make copies of itself, but make it more perfect every time they do it. I know that that's kind of weird to think about, but that honestly is what artificial intelligence is and what it is capable of. And that's what we have to be very, very careful with. And when we see these robots running and jumping up stairs and doing it with ease, the physical nature of these robots is there to be very, very powerful and very, very dangerous. And when you then add on board artificial intelligence software that can do anything that you and I can do, it will be able to do it better. And it will be able to do it better by trial and error and learning, just like humans have done over the course of thousands and thousands of years with our science and technology and inventions and what we do and how we operate and how we've evolved with our intellect. Robots, time is really less of an issue. Not only are they immortal, they can do things a heck of a lot quicker. So it's scary to see these videos, but it is fascinating nonetheless. I'll go ahead and link over to that story. It's on Market Watch. Quite a few places picked it up, though, and I'll make sure that you guys have access to that video, too, because it's creepy when you see this thing running around, and it's scary when you start thinking about it. This week, also, it's not TBV news if I can't talk about space a little bit. The big headline from space was that the Hubble Space Telescope actually had a pretty big problem this week. NASA had announced that it went into a safe mode, that there was a problem with one of its equipment or instruments on board, which kind of threw it into a safe mode, making sure that no other additional damage would happen. Now, obviously, the Hubble is getting up there in age, and so there's been fear that this thing would eventually die, that the Hubble Space Telescope would essentially not work or function anymore, and maybe a thing of the past. So when this headline surfaced, obviously a lot of people out there, including myself, were a little concerned that maybe this time the Hubble was at its end. Well, just in the last 24 hours of recording this or so, NASA announced that they don't believe that that malfunction is going to last long. They believe that it's actually just something that is fairly routine in the sense that they're going to be able to fix it. And the safe mode was just that. It was just a safeguard for the telescope. And according to them, they believe that that the Hubble will be around for many years to come and continue to make those discoveries. So that's still kind of unfolding right now. As far as I know, as of the recording of this, the Hubble Space Telescope is still in that safe mode and is not back online. But according to NASA, everything should be okay. Now that leads me to the last thing I want to mention, which is kind of fun. I've got a personal connection to this. A new series is actually going to come about called Cosmos: Possible Worlds. Now, Cosmos, as you know, was an original series by Carl Sagan many, many years ago. And about 4 years ago, I guess I should say now, about 4 years ago, it was rebooted. And it was rebooted with Neil deGrasse Tyson taking the place of Carl Sagan, obviously, who has passed on many years ago. Now, this was a extraordinary series back in the day with Carl Sagan. So there was some concern. How was this new one going to be? Well, I'm telling you, it was pretty extraordinary. My connection to it on a personal level is, for those who don't know, I produced the behind-the-scenes documentary for Cosmos. Now, this was one of those examples of things that I couldn't talk about in the world of television until it happened. And it pained me because being such a geek, if you haven't noticed yet here on this show, being such a geek, I was thrilled to be asked to work on Cosmos. I would have been the janitor on Cosmos and have been, completely fine to do something like that versus actually creating a documentary on how it all happened. So the short of it is they created the show and then contacted me to do the behind the scenes. And the behind the scenes was going to be a documentary that was only available on the Blu-ray edition of Cosmos. So they had the 10 episodes, and then my job was to come in and show how it all happened. And I had a lot of fun going in there, and it was pretty crazy. I mean, just to give a little bit of insight, I was not even able to get the digital scripts, meaning Microsoft Word or PDF versions of the scripts, for me to pull sound bites and for me to use that way. I literally, out of a locked vault, had to grab all 10 scripts and then go into a room and produce and write that way. And yes, I could type in some of the sound bites that I pulled, but the full scripts were off limits. And then every day when I drove home, right beforehand, I would go back and they would be locked back up. And so it was a pretty big deal. And what's funny is, this is just it's an amazing show, don't get me wrong, but just a television show, and there's that type of security involved in it. And in the end, I was really proud of it. I got to work with Neil deGrasse Tyson and interview him to do some behind-the-scenes stuff. And he was great. We took some selfies behind the scenes. We had a lot of fun. He's a very cool guy, and someone I would love to work with again. Now, the reason why I bring that up is this new series now, Cosmos: Possible Worlds, finally has a trailer to it. They announced it this week at the New York Comic Con just a few days ago on Sunday, October 7th. Pretty amazing. What really makes Cosmos stand out are the graphics. Now, Neil deGrasse Tyson is great. Don't get me wrong. He's a great television host, really delivers perfectly. And just with my small experience with him behind the scenes and then interviewing him on camera, he's great. He really delivers this home. But the graphics and what they have produced and created is just mind-blowing. It really is on a CGI level. So I'm going to link over to the story, this one published by Spacebut.com, and obviously the trailer for Cosmos Possible Worlds. I don't talk about actual series coming around that often, but this one I definitely say is worth it. If you don't know how to see all the links, go to www.theblackvault.com/show notes. This is episode number 14. Every story that I just talked about and important links will be on that page. Now, I don't want to delay any longer because I yapped in the beginning of the show giving you guys an update on what was going on online, just to kind of dispel one of those, yet again, bad facts circulating around. I don't want to waste any more time. I want to get to David Paulides, who's on hold waiting to come on board on the Black Vault Radio and the TBV Dialogue segment. Stay tuned. In this episode's TBV Dialogue segment, I welcome David Paulides into the vault. David has an undergraduate and a graduate degree from the University of San Francisco and has a professional background that includes 20 years in law enforcement and senior executive positions in the technology sector. In 2011, David utilized his background to begin researching mysterious disappearances of people in the wild throughout North America. As a result of his research, he founded the CanAm Missing Project, and he recently just published his 8th book in a series he calls Missing 411. The latest is entitled Missing 411: Land, Air, Water. In May of 2017, Missing 411, the documentary, was released to the world, in which David was listed as the executive producer, and of course, the entire documentary was based on his hard work, his thorough research, and his long line of books on the topic. Let me welcome to the show, Mr. David Paulides.
Hey, John, it's my pleasure to be here with you.
It's an honor to have you, and I've got a lot of respect for you. I've mentioned this on the show before about original research, and that is something that I really do respect, the very select few that pursue original research. And what I mean by that is you're not just copying what other people are doing. You are in the forefront, getting out there and really pursuing something that, I mean, I can't name anybody that's really doing this specific research, but they should. And you are out there doing the original research, and I do want to commend you for that. So thank you for joining me on the show. I want to ask you how you got started in researching these mysterious disappearances. How did that come about?
So I was doing some peripheral research at a national park, and in a national park, the people you really want to talk to are the people that run the concessions there, because they're not employees of the government. They're private people that are hired by companies that run the, even the campsites and the stores, et cetera. And I was talking to them, and I noticed that a couple of rangers were following me around, and that's kind of normal. And at the end of the night, I heard a knock on the door, and it was one of these rangers in plain clothes. And he goes, "Hey, Dave, we know who you are, and we have some information we want to share with you, and could I come in and talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." And initially it was just one, then it was two later. The second one arrived. But what they said was that they had worked in a series of national parks in their career, and they had seen disappearances. And the first 7 to 10 days, there was a lot of publicity, and there was a lot of interest. And quickly, it tapered off. And at the end of that 10 days, sometimes 7, sometimes 5, there would essentially be no activity, and it would be over. Well, these guys, these two rangers, were interested in what happened with the cases, and they tried to go through their own system and find out. Sometimes they were stalled, thwarted, told them nothing was interesting. But one of the other things they found was that people were disappearing in areas where they thought was odd. After subsequent research on this, I found out that it was true. A lot of these people disappear not in the far reaches of a park, but sometimes right in the valley floor where it makes no sense at all. And they said, "Well, we know that you have a research background. We know you're a cop. We know you've written some books, and we think you ought to be on it. And we'd like to give you some headway and some ideas about what to do. They gave those to me. I left the park the next morning, called a couple people in law enforcement, and I said, hey, they said there's a lot of people missing in these parks. I never heard of it. So could you tell me, run some names through NCIC and see if they're missing? Well, they came back to me and they said, wow, Dave, there's a lot of people missing in these parks. We didn't realize it either, but you might be onto something. That's kind of how it all started. And after I got back, I started going through archive searches and things, finding some strange disappearances, and immediately I filed a series of Freedom of Information Act requests, something you are very aware of, John.
I've dabbled, yes.
Yeah, the worldwide expert I'm talking to. I filed them against the National Park Police, and I asked for a list of missing people in their jurisdiction. Now, for people who don't know, the National Park Police are trained at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. They're highly trained. They get better training than 90% of the police officers in the United States. They know how to proceed on cases. They know what's important and what's not. They know the importance of lists. Well, after months of waiting, I get a call from an attorney from the National Parks asking me why I wanted that list. And I said, well, that's an odd thing to call about because I know you can't use that in justification about if you release it. Oh, no, sir, that's not why we're calling. We're just interested why you want to know. I said, just doing research. They said, well, we don't have any list. And I said, what? And they go, no, we don't have any list of missing people in our parks. I said, how can that be? And they said, no, we don't. I said, okay. So I got off the phone. I spoke with my buddies in law enforcement. They said, well, it must be semantics. Maybe it's the way you worded it or something, but let's try it again. Another couple months later, this time we get a call back from a guy in Yosemite National Park who is a special agent. His name was YU. And I had asked for a series of lists from Yosemite and a series from the national parks, and specifically one case out of Yosemite. Well, you told me that I would never get that case, even though it was over 35 years old. No one had looked at it. It was still classified as a missing person, and there were no suspects. So that makes no sense at all. He goes, nope, you're never going to see this. And I said, how about a list from Yosemite? We don't have any lists. And I wrote a letter back to the Park Service, and I said, well, I'm a published author. I want to claim an author's exemption, and I want you to accumulate the data for me. Get another call back from an attorney saying, I'm sorry, we did a search, and your books aren't in enough libraries to qualify for the author's exemption.
Jeez, wow.
You ever heard that, John?
No. Why do you think they're fighting you on all of this? I mean, what was your, as a law enforcement officer, because I don't want to get too far ahead, but as a law enforcement officer, what was your impression in these beginning stages of your research on why they were pushing back, why there were no lists, and why all of this was going on?
So a good friend of mine, and I know a good friend of yours too, is George Knapp. And chief investigative journalist for CBS in Las Vegas. And George and I talked about this incessantly. And I've talked to law enforcement guys about it. And George said in our movie, looked right in the camera and says, they're lying. They've got a list. They don't want you to have it. And I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt, but I'm starting to lose my faith in the National Park Service because now I've been at this for almost 8 years, accumulating the data and going through these cases. And there are peculiar things about these disappearances. And I know I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, and I can't be the only one that's put this together. So there's got to be some reason they don't want this data floating around out in the public view.
In those beginning stages of looking into this, backing you up again towards the beginning, and they said that something was strange, and again, you're approaching this from a law enforcement background. What were some of the characteristics that you saw in the beginning stages that made you realize, okay, this is not just a natural, natural's a bad word, but just a normal, prosaic disappearance? There is something more to this. What were you seeing in those beginning days?
So one of the things, I've always enjoyed the outdoors, hunter, fisherman. I get out there all the time, and I thought I was pretty on top of the news. And I think the most astonishing thing to me were the pure numbers and what they were doing to conceal the numbers. One way they do it is they classify somebody who's been missing, say, 3, 4, 5 years as missing, presumed deceased. That classification wipes you off the rolls of the missing people. And that's something that they use, and the U.S. Forest Service uses, as a way to clean their roll. So, we don't have that many missing people. That bothered me a lot.
Yeah. So what kind of characteristics, though, were you seeing, though, other than the record keeping? Because obviously they were messing that up because they weren't keeping any records. So it's kind of weird that they were telling you we don't have that many people, but what were they basing it on? But maybe that's a different discussion. But what characteristics on these cases that when you started to kind of dive in, were you seeing?
So when you look at, say, 10 cases of missing people in the wilderness, there's not a lot that's going to fall out on you. But when you look at 1,000, 3,000, 5,000, certain things hit you in the face. And when I was at about 300 or 400, my office looked like I probably had 15 or 20 piles of cases in different places that all represented something unusual. One of the things that hit me right away was, in my law enforcement time, I worked on the SWAT team, and assigned to the SWAT team was the canine unit. We had 20 canine units. And 10 hours a day, one day every other week, we would commit to training, and the dogs would train with us many times. These dogs were phenomenal. I can never remember a time putting one of these police dogs on a hunt for somebody that ran from us where the dog didn't find the person. That's how good they are. Well, I found hundreds of cases where canines were put on the scent trail of someone who disappeared and they couldn't find the person. Many times they couldn't even find the scent, apparently, because they'd walk down the trail a couple feet, turn around, come back to their master, and either lay down, sit down, completely uninterested in looking for a person. And many times these notes are in the case files of the search and rescue report. So dogs, when you take them out to a scene, damn, they always want to work. It's like fun for them. It's like the hunt. So to see that kind of behavior is not normal. Another thing I found is that there's weather changes in conjunction with the search or shortly after somebody goes missing. And those weather changes can be many things. It can be rain, snow, wind, hail. I even write about a case where there's a big dust storm. A lot of times, this is a weird one, and I'll state this up front. This is not a knock on search and rescue people. Most of the people in the world don't know that 99% of the searching for people in the wilderness is done by volunteers. And they get certified on their own. They volunteer their time. They're salt of the earth kind of people, great people, and without them, 99% of the people would never be found. Well, a lot of times victims are found in an area that had been previously searched. Previously searched not just once or twice, sometimes 20 times. I have cases where the victim was found laying across a trail that search and rescue people took on a daily basis out to the search area. Very strange. The time of the disappearance, after I started to catalog this, the most common time was 4 p.m. Many of the victims suffer some kind of physical abnormality, disability, or illness. Just took a lot to figure out. If a victim is found, and they're found alive, the vast majority of times, they don't have a memory about what happened, and they don't remember how they disappeared. Water plays a key role in the disappearances. A lot of times people are found in or near water, or they disappear in close proximity to water. One of the stranger ones is boulders and granite play into this. So after looking at 5,000 cases, categorizing over 1,000 disappearances that all match these profile points, the largest geographical cluster in the world that fits this profile is Yosemite National Park. And where is the biggest conglomeration of granite in the world but Yosemite National Park? And the more you keep your eye and ear on that granite, the more you figure out that people are found laying on granite, near granite, around or in a boulder field. It's highly unusual. Another point is something I call a POS in the book. It's called the point of separation. And that is that someone can be together, let's say, hunting, fishing, hiking all day. And at some point, they separate for a minute or two, and something happens. And I don't know what it is, but it's during that point of separation that people disappear. There's also several times I've written about intellects, highly, highly intellectual people that have disappeared and have never been found. Probably the one that's got the most press is physicists. There's a group of physicists in the world that have disappeared and have never been found, and unusually, they're all German. And the stories are highly weird, but they're true. And in my search to find a physicist that wasn't German that disappeared, I failed. They're only German, and they're only physicists. But I also have a lot of physicians that have disappeared, professors, highly intellectual people.
Wow. I'm German, but thankfully I'm not a physicist, so I should be safe hiking in the wild. 5,000 cases, that's extraordinary. Before we drill down on some of those characteristics, and I know there's more, we'll get into them, but before we drill down into some of that, where do you find your cases? How are you doing that particular part of the research?
So that's a stumbling block at times. I started off focusing on just national parks. Then I went to U.S. Forest Service property, Bureau of Land Management. Then I went to state property. I continued to kind of branch out when I found cases that matched. Now, with the national parks, their ability to give me a case file that I request and their attitude about giving it can be as easy as a flip of a coin, confusing. Their policies make no sense. In Yosemite National Park, I could request any case file, and the answer will be no every time. I could request a case file from Mount Rainier National Park, and it may be yes all the time. There's no rhyme or reason why I get one. It's kind of like the attitude of the people in the park, and if I appeal, I'll always lose. The U.S. Forest Service, many of the cases on their property are handled by the sheriff's office in that jurisdiction. Now, that when I get a case file or not out of them kind of depends on if they think there's something in there that I shouldn't see. I won't get it. If it's a case out of, say, the state of Washington, I'll probably get it more times than not because Washington has a law very similar to the federal FOIA laws. So I'll get most of those. But realistically, a flip of a coin whether I get those. A lot of times I may rely on news reports. Sometimes I can bypass the sheriff or the Park Service and get a report from a coroner. But more times than not, I wish I could say it more clear, but it's a flip of the coin, John.
I again commend you on the original research aspect to this because not everything is done on the internet or can be done. That comes as a shock to some people, but trust me, Google doesn't have all the answers, and you're out there really digging, really trying to get this stuff. Now, just to clarify, to make sure I've got it right, 5,000 cases. Is that 5,000 cases you've analyzed and kind of picked out the mysterious ones, or you have 5,000 mysterious disappearances?
So I've documented and written about in the books over 1,100 cases.
Okay.
But I have looked at and analyzed over 5,000.
And out of the 5,000 that you've analyzed, what percentage have these mysterious characteristics that cue you in that there is something more to this was a bear attack or they fell off a cliff? Is there kind of a rough percentage?
So I'm pretty careful about what I put in front of the public because there's a lot of pessimists out there, and they're looking for a reason to discount the research.
Yeah.
So those borderline cases, public's never going to see them. The vast majority of the time, if a case fits those profiles, I'll put them I'll do the research on it and put it in a book. If the case is borderline, I won't even put it in, but I'll put it on the side and I'll refer to it later. But I would say it's probably about 30% that match.
About 30%. Okay, so that gives kind of a rough estimate. So that's good. Now, one of the characteristics, I want to take you back to the dogs. The animal aspect, just because I love animals, is a very interesting one. And although you didn't say this, so you may disagree with me, I don't know, but I'll say it. When you say that the dogs get onto a scent and they're out and it's like they start on a scent and maybe they track something to a point and then it just kind of vanishes. From your law enforcement background, the common sense way to look at that is the scent that they are following, whomever that was, just up and vanished. Is that a right assumption, or can we go that far?
I've heard handlers say, well, maybe the person was never here, even though the witnesses say this is the last point they saw him. Mm-hmm. I've heard explanations that the weather was real bad and it wiped out the scent. I've heard explanations that, from search and rescue people, I put this in the books. It's like that person just got picked up and flew away. Mm-hmm. I've heard other explanations like they evaporated right into the ground. I put these quotes in the books. So, I've heard it all. Mm-hmm.
Now, we know why you're doing this, and it's amazing work, but I want to ask you something that I hope many people in the audience are asking, and that is why you? Meaning, why isn't the National Park Service more involved? Why aren't local sheriff's offices more involved looking at these mysterious cases and characteristics and realizing these are not easy to quote unquote solve all the time? It seems like to me you're saying they just ignore all of that because nobody is asking the right questions. Is that accurate?
So again, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt on some of these things. And I'll say that, let's say you're a ranger at Crater Lake National Park on the law enforcement side, and you have a case of a missing person. And you research it, and in your gut you say, yeah, it's kind of a strange case, but you write it up. You don't have anything else to lean back on. You put it in the file, and you try to forget it because it's a bad memory. Mm-hmm. The truth of the matter is that the Park Service, on one scale, has very limited resources. I am probably in a good position to look at all of these cases from 50,000 feet rather than 100 feet, like somebody at a regional park. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at this on a bigger scale, a grand scale, 60 geographical missing person clusters in North America. I'm not that one guy in a small park that has one case. I kind of have an interesting background, so maybe my expertise and my investigative skills that were developed in an urban setting with a lot of high crime is different, again, from that ranger that really doesn't deal in this a lot. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to nix them real hard on that part of it. I do think that there's a liability on the side of the National Park Service to not tell people that, if somebody has over 50 missing people that we've never found, a lot of those people are right here in the valley, and a lot of these people have disappeared under strange circumstances. I think it's incumbent to educate the public to let them know that a national park isn't a place where you take your young child and let them run around on a playground like you're down the block from your house. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of dangerous things in a national park, and just because you're there, it's not Yogi the Bear time.
Yeah. I can hear the respect that you have still for the National Park Service, even though it sounds like you're getting increasingly frustrated for that. But I have to ask, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you look into these 5,000 cases with a 30% approximate, case number that shows you these mysterious characteristics and something that warrants a further investigation or at least asking additional questions, how many of those then do the National Park Service or the Sheriff's Office or whomever investigated it and they just kind of close the case? Do they kind of chalk up as like that was a bear attack or, hiking accident or, we never found the body, but we think they probably died of dehydration? How many do you think that they have quote unquote solved on the books that when you look at the actual evidence, you go, whoa, wait a minute. That can't be true for XYZ. Is there a big number of cases in that category?
I tend to think that all of the cases fall into this realm of, well, that was bad judgment, or, the weather must have taken them, or, yeah, it's a little unusual, but it just happened. And when I started to write my first couple of books, I knew I had a large number of cases involving small kids, 2, 3, and 4 years old. And it's easy for people to kind of say, well, this 25-year-old guy disappeared. Maybe he got lost and he hiked out of the search area and they didn't find him because they didn't go out 5 or 10 miles and his body's probably there. Reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take a 2 or 3-year-old and you say, well, let's leave them in the woods. And when I'm at conferences, I ask people, I said, how many people here have kids? They raise their hand. I said, okay, what would your child do at 2 years old if you put them on a trail and you walked away? Would they run uphill? Would they run downhill? Would they play in the mud? Would they lay down and take a nap? What would they do? And I hear all kinds of answers, but very few say they'd run uphill.
Mm-hmm.
But in the books, I have many cases where 2 and 3-year-old kids were found miles and miles from the point they were last seen, and they were found thousands of feet above where they were last at.
Wow.
Trying to reconcile that in your mind as something natural is very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't
know about you, John, but my kids were always pretty lazy.
Well, mine sometimes I wish was lazy. My little 4-year-old has more energy than I can even explain on the radio. But let me ask you just kind of a skeptical question, which I'm sure you've been asked before. When somebody says that that's just simply a potential predator, a coyote, a mountain lion, does your research bear that out or dismiss it?
So if there's any evidence of mental health issues, predation, meaning animal attack, then I don't even include those in the books.
Mm-hmm.
And search and rescue people and law enforcement people that are working these cases, they're looking for that. If somebody has been attacked by an animal, there's going to be drag marks, there's going to be blood, clothing, screams because you're attacked. None of those things ever happen. And when the people are eventually found, I don't have one case where there's ever been animal predation that I've written about. The bodies are intact. They're not abused. There's no sexual trauma, etc. There's no evidence of any criminal behavior.
And that's why I wanted to ask you some of these questions, because for those listening, I was honored to speak at the Mile High Mystery Conference that David had put on in Colorado for at least 2 years. Maybe I'll put him on the spot, see if there's going to be another one coming here in 2019. But that being said, I was very struck and very moved, actually, to hear David firsthand really dive in to some of these cases and the emotion behind it. And being fairly skeptical, I will say that when I sat down before David talked, even though I've known him personally for a while, before David talked, I was waiting for the evidence that would kind of lean towards a mountain lion or lean towards some kind of, predation or something like that. And there weren't any. And for those listening, David really has done a great job of really not even dealing with those cases. In fact, when you, like he pointed out, when you do have some kind of animal attack, you've got clothes ripped, you've got blood. And a lot of these cases, you have quite the opposite, where clothes are like removed, and I'll let you get into the details, but removed with no tears or completely kept intact, no blood, no wounds, no nothing. And to hear that is something that really starts to make you wonder what in the world is going on. So I wanted to point that out just for those who do have a skeptical point of view that might be listening. I wanted to just at least give you that experience that I had firsthand listening to David talk about this, not only on the radio, but again, in person. It's a very powerful thing to sit through, and very emotional. And I will admit you get teared up when you start thinking about these kids going through whatever this is, going through this, and ultimately the end is not what we want it to be. So, David, let me kind of pass it back to you. Give me, let's kind of drill down into a specific case. Is there one, or at least one, that really sticks out to you as going, this is why I do what I do and why I research this?
Well, I would think that it would be the Jared Atadero case, and where you met Alan Atadero, his dad.
Yes. Yeah.
So Jared, there was so much about the case that was completely erroneous. First of all, happened in the late 1990s in northern Colorado, and the Ataderos owned a kind of a ranch hotel kind of thing along the river, the Poudre River in Northern California, an idyllic spot. Jared was 3, almost 4 years old, and he was an outdoor kid, really, really personable. Well, this one weekend, Alan at the resort was hosting a group of singles, and the single people wanted to go to a fish hatchery to visit, and it was only like a mile down the road, and they were taking Jocelyn, his older sister. Well, Jared heard about it and said, Dad, they said I could go if you said it was okay. And Alan goes, okay, you can go. So they were going to be back in like an hour or something, and they left, and there was probably maybe 15 people in this group. Well, when they were at the fish hatchery, they decided that they wanted to go up the road another 20 miles to a place called the Big South Trail. And that's a gorgeous area that follows the Poudre River into the wilderness. And they never told Alan. They just took the kids and went. Well, as single people will, they lost track of Jared on the trail somewhere. And they came back and they told Alan, hey, this is the quote, everything is okay, but we can't find Jared.
Wow.
Can you imagine if you were told that?
Heart-wrenching to hear that.
Oh, my God. So Alan gets in his truck, drives up there, and he goes, in his mind, he's saying, okay, I'll find them. He'd never been to this trail either, even though it was fairly close to his place. And he gets there and he starts going down the trail, and he can't believe that he's not seeing anybody. It's really remote. It's along the river. He's afraid Jared may go in the river, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Make a long story short, he comes back. Larimer County sheriffs start to arrive, and one of the biggest cases in Colorado history starts to lay itself out. And they start calling for search and rescue support. They start calling for more horsepower, manpower, everything you can imagine. And this thing turns into a huge, huge multi-day effort. At one point in the third day, they got air support from the Air Force. And an Air Force helicopter is flying in, and it crashes right in the middle of the search zone.
Wow.
Shuts down everything. And one of the things I've written about in my books is that there's an abnormal number of aircraft crashes in conjunction with these searches. And I can't explain why, because they seem to be all different reasons, but there is. And that shut down the search for a good couple days. And they had brought canines in. They hadn't picked up a scent. They had hundreds of ground teams in there. Alan was approached by some of the best search and rescue dogs in the world. And they said, hey, we'll volunteer our time. We'll be there in a day. He goes to the search and rescue people, and they say, no, you can't let him in. And that's something about some of these searches. There's this territorialism in the attitude. Rather than bringing in the best resources, sometimes these people only want their own resources in there. So search is about 10 days old. Alan is sitting in the command van, and one of the dog handlers says, hey, we need the scent bag. We're going to put some new dogs out. Well, one of the law enforcement guys reaches under the cupboard and brings out this giant bag and hands it to the searcher. And Alan goes, hey, wait a minute, what's in that? And he goes, oh, here, you can look at it. And he goes, Alan looks inside, and it's Alan's shorts.
Ugh, they were using the wrong one.
In the scent bag.
Yeah.
So they haven't even been searching with the right scent.
Wow.
Alan was furious.
Yeah, I would
should have
imagine.
been.
And what day was that, just to clarify and timestamp it? I mean, this wasn't day one, was it, or was it?
No, it wasn't day one. It was down the trail a little bit. But so they eventually have to call off the search. They're about 10 days into it. They don't have anything. They don't know. They told Alan that they were, highly certain that Jared must have fallen in the river and drowned because they couldn't find any scent. They couldn't find any evidence he was on the mountain. But they did find 2 fishermen. Apparently, Jared ran in front of this group of young people on the trail. And as he's going down the trail, he picks up a stick and he's hitting it in the water near these 2 fishermen. And they tell him, hey, stop hitting the stick in the water. And he goes, hey, are there any bears around here? And the fishermen say, no, there's no bears. We've never seen a bear around here. Don't bother us. Now, understand the scenario, John. You're in the middle of a wilderness area. Nobody's around. And you got this little 3-4-year-old kid that walks up on you.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell him to go away, that's for sure.
Exactly.
Wow.
That was the last time anyone saw Jared alive.
In
a very, very strange story, about a year ago, my girlfriend and I are up in Great Rocky Mountain National Park, about 5 air miles from where this happened. And we're at this lake in this remote area. And we're walking down this trail, and Angie grabs me by the back of the coat and goes, Dave, turn around. I'm thinking, there must be some animal behind us. Right behind us is this little 3 or 4-year-old boy. I go, hi. He goes, hi. I'm thinking, what the heck? This is something out of the Twilight Zone. I'm thinking.
Yeah, really?
I go, where's your parents? Oh, they're way over there on the other side. And I said, do they know where you're at? Oh, I don't know. They're just letting me walk around.
Ugh.
I said, why don't you take us back over to your folks?
Mm-hmm.
So we walk at least a couple hundred yards through the woods, and we get to this little campsite where there's this little tent and this woman sitting in a chair and a man laying in the tent. I said, hi, hey, we found your boy over by the lake. Oh, yeah. It was like, oh, yeah, so what?
Oh, wow.
I said, well, within 10 miles of here, there's 5 people that are missing. And I said, there's mountain lions around here, there's bear, there's elk and moose, and there was the lake, and your boy was standing right next to it. So you may want to keep a little tighter reins on him.
Wow.
Well, okay, thank you.
Jeez, they didn't even care.
It blew me away. Again, that people have this attitude that when you're in the wilderness, it must be a safe playground.
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow, getting back to Jared, about 4 or 5 years later, after he disappeared, 2 guys were hiking on a ridge above the trail where Jared disappeared, and they came across a strange scene. They find a pair of young boys' sweatpants turned inside out and a sweatshirt laying nearby it. And they knew about Jared's disappearance, and they thought, this has got to be related to it. Well, also right next to this, they found one tooth sitting on top of a log next to the clothes. So the sheriff comes in, takes everything. It's Jared's clothing. It's Jared's tooth. And they do a search, and they find the top of the skull nearby.
Ugh.
And they send everything to a lab. And there's no blood on any of the clothing. And they have a press conference with Alan, and they declare that Jared got attacked by a mountain lion.
But no blood.
No blood.
Okay.
There's hairs on the clothing, and this is an unbelievable part, but I've got the report, so I know. The analyst couldn't identify the hairs on the clothing. And I know a lot about this because of previous work, but their analysts, hair and fiber experts, have a chart of every mammal hair in North America.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy to tell different kinds of hairs when you look at them under a microscope. Well, this analyst couldn't determine what kind of hair it was. which was weird. And they also stated in the report there was no blood on any of the clothing. And the pants were inside out, which is very odd.
Yeah.
So Alan didn't believe it. So Alan, on his own, takes the evidence and all the clothing and shows it to 4 different mountain lion experts. And they said, I don't know where these people think a mountain lion killed your son, but each one independently said, no, a mountain lion did not kill your son. So what killed Jared Attadero? And how did he get 550 feet up the side of a very steep mountain that I had to get up with my hands and knees to get up it? How did he get up it?
Yeah, and I think the fact that there was no blood I'm just trying to punch that note again, but I mean the fact that there was no blood, why would they label it an attack like that when there's no physical proof whatsoever? Or what am I missing? Like, where did that come from? So
a New York detective coined this phrase. I can't claim victory on this, but it's called local reports for local consumption, meaning this case was a sore point in Larimer County, Colorado for years, and the public was always disturbed about this disappearance. But a mountain lion excuse everyone can swallow. Everyone can accept it.
So you think it's for not the benefit of the public, but the ease of understanding and accepting what happened to Jared?
Yeah.
Okay. But obviously his father didn't buy it.
No. And anyone with an ounce of common sense, once you understand the facts of the case, will say, man, it wasn't a mountain lion.
With you recollecting the story of what happened, even during the investigation and the hunt, and even after, it just like there's too much evidence to show that there is this pushback on a federal level, this pushback of trying to figure out what the truth is. Because in one breath at the press statement, we see this throughout different niches of research, not just mysterious disappearances, but focusing in on what you just said. At the press press conference at the podium, they're saying mountain lion case solved, but the evidence doesn't show blood, doesn't show ripped or tattered clothing, and shows a hair, and I want to go back to this, a hair that they could not identify. Now, this was not in the 1920s, obviously, so the technology was there to figure out what this hair was. Why would they dismiss evidence like that?
You're asking the million-dollar question. But law enforcement agencies don't do well with the unknown. Mm-hmm. They don't want to address it, and they never want to say to the public, we don't understand it, or this is confusing. They always want to look like they're in charge, kind of like the authority. So they will just ignore it. One thing that Alan was highly upset about was that he knew that his son's pants were turned inside out. One leg and one half of it was inside out when they found it. Yet at the press conference, it was all turned neatly the right way and presented to the public like that. And Alan said, why aren't you presenting it the way it was found? Mm-hmm. And he knew why, because if they presented it the way it was found, it wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Now, there's one other item on the Attadero case that nobody picked up on until we got that case. And Alan, it's a shocker. He reached out to me when somebody told him I'd written this story about his son. And we've gotten together probably 20 times since then. And he's just the nicest person and he's a smart man. He's a teacher. Mm-hmm. And he still had his son's skull. And he showed it to me. And right away, there were things about that skull that didn't look right. Namely, on the side of the skull, there were cut marks in the skull as though you took a really sharp knife and purposely put these marks in the side of the skull. Now, the excuse Alan was given, which is just the worst, is that, his skull must have traveled down the river, and these rocks made these abrasions in the skull. Now, remember, everything about Jared was found 550 feet above that river. That skull never met the water.
Wow.
And the cut marks in the skull weren't like rocks scratching it. We're talking about something really sharp.
Mm-hmm.
So when I saw it, I took the pictures and I sent them to Harvey Pratt, who was agent with the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation. And I knew he had forensic contacts that would look at this and give us an opinion. And some of these were forensic examiners that have seen thousands of skulls. And Harvey showed the pictures to one of these experts. And he said in the 5,000 cases he's looked at, he's never seen anything like it.
From the physical evidence side or the story as a whole?
We're just talking about the marks on the side of that skull.
Just the marks. Okay, I thought maybe it was he was looking at everything. Okay, gotcha.
So that's pretty convincing evidence to everyone I've ever showed that to, that something really, really weird happened there.
And the Andadero case is not alone. It's extraordinarily powerful when you hear you talk about it and when you hear Alan talk about it, but it does not stand alone. Tell the audience about another case, which I'll let you select, but tell them about another one that just shows you there's much more going on here.
So one of the books I wrote was a book about missing hunters. Now, this story didn't make the Hunters book because I didn't discover it until just the last year. But it's one of the most unusual, and it involves a guy named Craig Guymon, Guymon. And he went missing on October 6, 1996, in the Gross Venture Wilderness in Wyoming. He was 47 years old. Now, before I tell you that story, I have a couple of buddies of mine named Ruben Uriarty and Noe Torres. And Ruben is one of the state directors for MUFON, Mutual UFO Network.
Mm-hmm.
And I've spoken in front of those groups. I don't even know. You might know Ruben.
I do. Yeah, I've been friends with him for a long, long time. I love that guy. He's going to be coming up hopefully soon here on the show. For those listening, he'll be coming up. But so you talked to Ruben.
Yeah, and he wrote a book called Aliens in the Forest.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1964, a guy named Donald Shroom, who was employed as a U.S. missile manufacturing contractor, this guy was hunting near Cisco Grove, California, off Highway 80, kind of on your way to Tahoe, 25 miles west of the lake. And while he was out there by himself hunting, he states he met two unusually dressed alien-type people, and they chased him up a tree. He says as he's on top of this tree, they released some kind of gas that made him unconscious. And when he woke up the next day, he couldn't remember much. And I won't tell you everything about this story, but I will tell you that Noe and Ruben did one great job of researching and getting government documentation that this was a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of hold that story in the back of your mind. Now, in the Guymon story, October 6, 76, he's hunting with a group of friends on horseback. And they're hunting near an area called Soda Lake outside of Pinedale, Wyoming. And they were on the horseback and they were hunting around and they were looking for elk. And he gets off, shot, thought he hit an elk, rode up a little closer, and then he had to get off, tied up his horse, and him and his buddies separated, and he went one way, they went another way. Again, point of separation. Well, his friends realized that they couldn't locate Craig, and they couldn't locate the elk, and they couldn't find anything. And they searched that night, and then the next day they called for the sheriff, and a massive search ensues. Now, so that happened on October 6th. October 8th, 1 mile from where he was last seen, they walk up on this unusual scene that is almost unbelievable. What they see is they see Craig laying on the ground dead underneath a tree. The sheriff stated it was obvious that he fell out of the tree, but I'll quote him, "But we don't know what he was doing up there." His boots, now this is the part that's interesting, his boots, his coat, and his hat were still up in the tree. Autopsy showed he had many broken bones, but the coroner stated that he didn't die because of the broken bones. They never located Craig's gun, ever. He had no mental health issues. They said there's no way he could have gotten lost. So the question is, why would he climb a tree? Why would he disrobe? Where did his gun go? Now, one of the things that I write about in my stories is that a lot of the people that have disappeared end up missing clothing, boots, etc. And a lot of people may say, oh, well, that's hypothermia. Except the problem with that is that many times the weather doesn't constitute a hypothermia. Many times the clothing is found in close proximity to where the person disappeared. There was no time for hypothermia to hit. And when you're involving young children, many times the parents said, no, my child couldn't undress themselves. So they thought that Craig died from hypothermia, but they weren't sure, and there was never, ever a clear answer about what he was doing up in that tree.
Fairly similar to Noe and Reuben's case.
That's exactly what I thought of when I read it.
Do you find a connection? Because obviously, going to Reuben's case, and you had brought it up that he had kind of said that they were aliens dressed up. Is there a connection between these disappearances and aliens? Is that what you're leaning towards?
Not in the least.
Okay.
This was just one case that seemed to have the same factors in a story that Reuben wrote about.
Which, and again, the mind is very interesting. Not to cut you off, the mind is very interesting. Where it possibly wasn't an alien. That's just what it was recalled as by the human brain. But let me just kind of point blank ask: as you go through these cases and you see these connections, what do you think is going on here?
So, I've sold a lot of books over the years. And I've had thousands of people write to me over the years. And I will swear to you, this is the truth. I have never had anyone read the 8 books and tell me, aha, we know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Never. I've had hundreds of people write to me and listen to an interview and say, oh, I know what's going on.
Sure, yeah.
So what I tell people is, yeah, you could listen to every interview I've ever done and probably have maybe 5% of all the data points that I present in the books.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not to say that certain cases lead to certain lines of thought. I could tell you about one more case. One of the cluster areas in the northwest part of the U.S. is Mount Rainier National Park. And there's a lot of missing people cases there. And in fact, that Cascade Range, starting at Crater Lake going north, there's a lot of people missing. Now, when I was doing the archival search on Mount Rainier, looking for older cases, I found something really unusual, and I thought, I've got to look into this further. And it took me a couple years to figure it out and get a lot of the files on it. And the more I dug into it, the more it bothered me. But Mount Rainier has about 1.4 million visitors last year. And I doubt 10 of them knew what I'm going to tell you right now. But Mount Rainier is the highest mountain in the Cascade Range at 14,410 feet. It's considered one of the top 16 of the most dangerous mountains in the world. And it has 26 different glaciers on it. Now, everyone knows those items because you can read about them at the park. But what I'm going to tell you now is even stranger. On December 10th, 1946, 6 U.S. Marine Curtiss Commando R-5C transports were sitting on the tarmac at El Toro Marine Base in San Diego. The planes were loaded with 200 soldiers that were going to be transported to Sandpoint Naval Air Station in Seattle. It'd be about a 6.5-hour flight. And those planes had a ceiling of 24,500 feet. The cargo area was not pressurized, so they wouldn't go very high. And the flight plan called them to fly at 9,000 feet. Now, 6 planes left in a static procession from the Marine base at 10:36 a.m. Well, one of those R-5Cs was piloted by Major Robert Riley. Later that day at 4:13 p.m., he contacted Toledo, Ohio Air Traffic Control, reporting he was getting ice on his wings, talking about Toledo, Washington. Mm-hmm. He asked for permission to go higher over the clouds. He estimated he was 30 miles south of the Air Traffic Control Center. He was told to contact them once he reached his new altitude. He never did contact them. During this time, 5 of those R-5Cs already landed in Seattle. Now, the Freedom of Information Act file I got on this said Everett ATC should have been able to hear the plane, but they never did. Now, there was enough fuel on these planes to fly for 10 hours. It was only a 6.5-hour flight. Well, that R-5C never arrived in Seattle. On December 11th, that entire Pacific Northwest region went into a high alert for the R-5C. But the issue was this part of Washington had a horrific blizzard. We're talking weather. And rangers at Mount Rainier had reported hearing a plane sometime around 4:15 on the day in question, but they never heard a crash or an impact. Now, for 5 days after that disappearance, snow just pounded this area of Washington, essentially grounding all search efforts. Headlines at the time stated that storms prevented the searching. But the search for the 32 soldiers on that plane went on for months. Now, here's a quote. A tattered fragment of a Marine's uniform, a weathered piece of a serviceman's health record, and some tiny bits of record indicate to the service that the plane hit the mountain. This was located at about 10,000 feet on Rainier by some National Park Service climbers. The report stated that they theorized the plane exploded and scattered the remains. NPS, National Park Service, said very, very little about this whole incident. Now, on August 24th, 1997, 10 bodies supposedly were located on the Tahoma Glacier. 21 bodies were located by 2 NPS rangers and a rep from the Navy. They said they didn't know if they could remove the bodies. And that's all they said. Now, in the book, I say, first of all, why would a Navy rep be on the side of the mountain in regards to a Marine transport plane? Now, the Army's Mountain Division was consulted about the task and stated it would take 2 weeks and 24 men to bring down the body. They never said they couldn't be done, but they said that's what it would take. So an article on August 28, 1947 stated that the Navy had said that the 13th Naval District made the comment that the idea of removing the bodies from the site of Rainier had been abandoned. The families had a memorial service on the mountain. 2,000 acres of the glacier was allocated as a memorial and a no-travel zone. And then in June of, now nothing for about 35 years, June of 82, a climber found an odd piece of equipment on the mountain, reviewed and determined to be part of that R-5C. Not one body has ever been recovered, and no determination of if the plane had engine problems or the cause of the crash. Now, here's some things I want everyone to think about. The R-5C disappeared near Rainier on December 10th, 1946. On June 29th, 1947, headlines in the Orlando Sentinel: flying pie tins hit 1,200 miles per hour. Flying pie tins hit 1,200 miles per hour. This is a famous statement that really started the modern day UFO movement. And where did that happen? That happened right next to Mount Rainier.
Wow.
About 6 months after this plane disappeared. The pilot at the time was a guy named Ken Arnold, who made that sighting. He was a businessman, and he owned an airplane. And he was actually flying by the mountain looking for the crash. Now, how do I know all this? Well, there's an optical physicist named Bruce Maccabee, who's wrote a great book about this incident. It's called 3 Minutes in June, the UFO sighting that changed the world. I was very lucky to spend 5 days at Bruce's house about 6 months ago, and we had multiple discussions about this. And he said, Dave, there's been so many people that have tried to minimize the importance of the Arnold sighting. But he goes, I spent months and months and months going through all those documents. And in those docs, he said that he was flying past Rainier looking for remnants of that crash. And he was a pilot. He was smart. He was able to see the movements of these things flying through the air. He saw 9 of those objects fly by him, and he was able to determine the speed based on time and locations. Now, think about this. What about that statement that the armed forces always have about no man left behind?
Mm-hmm. What happened?
Does it not apply to a mountain in our own U.S.?
Yeah. Just to clarify, you're saying that according to Dr. Maccabee, Kenneth Arnold was seeking that wreckage? Did I understand that correctly?
So he was flying from Idaho to, I forgot the exact location in Washington,
mm-hmm.
but he deviated to fly by Mount Rainier specifically to look for remnants of that crash.
Wow. That's interesting. I'd never heard that before or placed that connection. That's fascinating.
I had never heard that either. And for the people who don't know Bruce, he's impeccable with facts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very, very strange data point that really what starts our entire UFO movement is an observation made next to a mountain where there's all these disappearances, coupled with a disappearance of a transport plane that we've never found one body.
Your newest book, Missing 411, Land, Air, Water. I recommend everybody listening to check out not only that book, but his long line of now 8 in the Missing 411 series. The website is www.canammissing.com. That's CanAmMissing.com. We're not through yet, David, because I want to ask you a couple more questions. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I want to go back to what you feel is going on. Now, I'm not going to ask you that again, but I want to talk about it more broadly and ask you a different way. I know that you don't put a label on this, and that's one of the reasons, of the very many reasons that I respect your research, that you're not out there saying this is aliens. You're not out there saying this is a cryptozoological creature. You're not saying anything. You're just saying these are the facts. This is what it's not. But you're not necessarily pinpointing what it is. My question to you then is a little bit more broad. And again, I'm not trying to beat the dead horse, but after you look at these 5,000 cases and you whittle them down and you figure out which ones truly have these mysterious characteristics, do you at least have a list of possibilities of what is going on, or do you just stay away from that entirely?
This is hard for people to understand, but I could be a really good investigator at accumulating data, understanding these profile points, sifting and getting the reports, and kind of filtering through the elements to understand what's applicable and what's not. Now, you've been in this Ooga Booga world for a long time, John,
mm-hmm.
and you know that we have all kinds of cryptids, we have supposedly things living underground, we've got things in the sky. How could anybody become an expert in all these things?
Yeah.
I don't claim to be an expert in any of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think I know more about disappearances in rural areas than most people. And I do think that there's something about this that our government has found is unusual. Way back when, one of my first couple of books, Missing 411 Eastern U.S., I wrote about a series of disappearances of people from the Great Smoky Mountain region of Tennessee. And in each case, the newspapers would show up, and there was always this one FBI agent that was there as well. And they would go over to him and they would ask him, hey, are you here? Are you working the case? Blah, blah, blah. He goes, no, just here monitoring the case.
Interesting.
It was always the same agent. And my old partner in the police department ended up being an FBI agent. He left a couple years after I was working with him, and he became a special agent in charge of a large area. And he said, Dave, one thing about the FBI is they are great at documentation. Most of them are really good writers, and they document it, and they send the reports up. And many times they go to the profiling unit, and they look for other cases of similar nature. Well, again, like, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I found these cases, and son of a gun, I find the same FBI agent at all of these cases.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote about it because they all held these same profile points. Now, there's a disappearance in the Great Smoky Mountains involving a young boy named Dennis Martin. One of the toughest interviews I've ever done in my life involved interviewing Dennis's dad not long before he died. And I met him at his house. I knocked on his door, which I never do this with a victim's family, but something told me I had to meet this man. And so myself and another investigator knocked on the door, and he came out and he said, "You know, Dave," he said, "my wife and I have lived with this for 45 years. It's haunted us our whole life. We made a decision not to talk about it anymore." And I said, "Mr. Martin, I respect that. I think I know more about this case than anyone in the world other than you. And I came all the way to California. If you just give me 5 minutes of your time." He says, "Absolutely, I will." And he stepped outside.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of talked about the different things involving his son's disappearance. And I said, and this FBI agent, he was on your son's case. And is there anything I should know about him? And he goes, "Well, you know what happened to him?" I said, "No." He goes, "He committed suicide, Dave." And that was just one of the bombshells that Mr. Martin dropped on us that afternoon. And the investigator out in Tennessee went out and followed it up and found out it was true. So this, I think there's something to these that we don't understand. I mean, on the Martin case, there's only 2 cases in the world that I know about where the Green Berets showed up and searched. They searched on U.S. land for a missing person. And I've had Green Beret soldiers come up to me and say, "Nope, Green Berets don't search for missing people." But I have 2 documented for sure cases where they did. And one of them was Dennis Martin's.
For those who don't know this aspect of it, tell everybody and speak about how strange it is for that federal involvement, for the FBI to be involved in just kind of monitoring. Is that out of the ordinary? And how out of the ordinary is it for the Green Berets to be involved with a search and rescue?
So I've had multiple Green Beret people say, "No, Green Berets don't search for missing kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've got higher tasks. We train. We'll search for bad people in other countries, but no, we're not going to search for your lost kid in the U.S. That's just not going to happen." I've had multiple people tell me this. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, John, but I filed a Freedom of Information Act request against the Department of the Army for all of the paperwork associated with the Green Berets being on the Dennis Martin search. 3 times I filed this in 7 years. 3 times. It was completely 100% ignored.
As in they never responded at all?
At all.
Well, there are things you can do. I don't know when the last time you tried, but if you're eager and game to try again, I can tell you some resources that if they try that again and they ignore you, in the last couple of years, some new tools that us FOIA requesters can use have come about, including a third-party agency called OGIS that can actually get involved and help mediate. So, you know, if you probably already know all about it, but if I can assist you in that, they can't do that. At least they're not supposed to. And if they do, there are now checks and balance systems in place that you don't even have to deal with that agency anymore. You can enlist the help of another one, and they're actually pretty good. They've helped me out on quite a few occasions.
Well, I may have to go that route because it's a very, very frustrating thing, as you know, to kind of have the evidence in front of you and want the background on why they were there. Let's see the orders. Let's see the documentation, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd be eager to help you and point you in whatever direction I can to help you, because that kind of stuff's pretty important, I think, in the grander picture. I have gone after documents on the ability, the legality and the ability for the United States military to operate and assist law enforcement on U.S. soil. Now, many people just dismiss it as that doesn't happen, and I will tell you firsthand, there are documents out there that actually show how the military, and this goes beyond the National Guard, but the military can actually assist in civil disturbances. And you get into some really bizarre areas on what the federal government can and can't do, but you realize they can do a lot more than what you might expect.
Well, one of the things I've been reminded of dozens of times since I wrote the Dennis Martin story is that most of the time, in circumstances such as this, a local jurisdiction may call for the National Guard. Now, the National Guard are people from the community.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have top secret clearances. They talk. You're going to see them at the store. That's not who they used in these instances. They used the Green Berets. They fly in. They're not from the area. They have top secret clearances. They're not going to talk, and they're going to leave, and you're never going to see them again. So it's just a completely strange scenario. Now, why would the FBI be there?
Mm-hmm.
I believe they are there to document what's going on. And I say that, and if you start paying attention to missing kid cases, missing children, and even missing people in the wilderness, have the public start paying attention to how many times the FBI shows up. The FBI does not have jurisdiction in missing people cases.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, they won't search for a missing person. Now, there's one aspect to their authority is that if it's a very, very young child, they have authority to get involved. Short of that, they don't. So why would they even be involved in these cases? Or why would they be interested in them if there wasn't something there that they're tracking?
Have you tried under the FOIA, out of curiosity, to you've mentioned getting actual case files, but the overall investigation arc of what they're doing? Have you tried to get anything from the FBI on why, on a broad scale, are they monitoring cases like this and taking notes and going into the field?
You know, honestly, I got so frustrated with them sending documents that were so redacted that it was worthless.
Yeah.
And I sort of gave up.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I've talked about the frustration factor many, many times, and I'll say it briefly again. I think that's part of the game. I think that they want people to give up. They frustrate you to death. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, a lot of times, and I wrote about this, I hate to give a shameless plug, but I'm going to bring it up. A book I'm publishing that's out next April, I go into detail and kind of juxtapose it with the JFK assassination material that on one hand, like you just said, you get a bunch of redacted material. On sometimes the opposite end of the spectrum, they literally bury you in documents. And so instead of having a couple hundred to read and kind of maybe formulate a story and get some answers, they literally plow and pile 100,000, 500,000, over 1 million pages on things. And then they just bury you. And it takes a decade and a half just to go through it anyway. But I do think that is part of the tactic, is they just want you to stop asking questions and to just simply go away. And that absolutely is a shame. What do you feel has to change to get answers to this? What can we do as the general public? Do we have to push our Congress people? Do you think this is even changeable, or is this something we just have to accept?
Well, honestly, since this information has gotten out there, I've gotten so many good leads from the public. I mean, I'll usually put out a case every other day on my Twitter and on Facebook. I do it regularly, and people communicate back to me, or sometimes if it's in a very rural area, it may not be getting the press that it should be. Give it to me, I'll give it the press.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people want me to react to an incident right away. That's not my nature. I want to see what evolves. I want to see the evidence. I want to see if there's a body, what the coroner's report says. It may not have anything to do with what we're researching, and not every case in the wilderness is related to what we're researching.
Yeah.
But anytime I can help, I'm going to. But really, it's those people out there giving me the heads up that is really valuable. And honestly, John, I've gone to you before for help on this. Your knowledge base of how to work your way through the system is so valuable that it would take many lifetimes of us out here on the periphery that do this only part-time to get 5% of the expertise you have in doing it.
Well, I appreciate that, but I learn stuff all the time. I mean, I do. I'm honored at the compliment, but it's tough. It really is tough, as you know, but also to those listening, I'm here to tell you it's tough. And when they push back and they don't want you to know something, that not only piques my interest, but it's rather frustrating, and it does want to make you just kind of give up. And after 22 years, I've just learned keep asking, and sadly, I have to go to the realm of being annoying on some occasions under the FOIA. But hey, it gets answers, and so you're to be commended for not only the work that you've done, but you continue to do. You brought up your Twitter. For those who do love tweets and want to follow David, his Twitter account is CanAm Missing. That's CanAmMissing. CanAm Missing. And when you follow, which I do, you've got thousands of followers, but when I follow your material, which I do, and see your posts, what's very interesting and disturbing all in the same breath is these mysterious disappearances, even though not all of them are, but they continue to this day. I mean, I see you posting and bringing awareness to these cases. Is there any slowdown? I mean, is there any kind of hope on the horizon, so to speak, that there's a diminishment as the public gets a little bit more aware to be more careful in the wild? Or do you think there are now more cases than ever?
So one thing I've got to get into the interview, which I do in every interview, is I promote that people should carry a personal locator beacon anytime they go into the mountains on a hike. And I promoted this because what it is, there's not a monthly fee. It costs a couple $100. Get them on Amazon. You activate it. It sends a message up to a satellite. That satellite sends a message to NOAA, and then they'll see your GPS coordinates, and they'll call the search and rescue closest to that location. Now, what's funny about that is I was in Australia, and we were filming some segments that you can see on our YouTube channel, which is also CanAm Missing Project. And I actually broke my leg on a trail in the middle of nowhere, Australia. So it can happen to anybody. I broke my fibia, but I was able to, walk my way out of there. And I actually hobbled around for another 8-9 days till I got home. And then I went to the doctors, and they said, well, we know your bone's not broken. I go, how do you know that? They go, well, you're still kind of walking on it. I go, take the x-ray. The doctor said, hey, first time in 20 years I've ever seen anybody walk into my office with a broken leg.
That's incredible.
It's pretty good, Dave. But the point is, it can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
Now, if you're off trail and you break your leg totally, you're not walking out, and you could die there.
Mm-hmm.
So always carry one. And I just would hope that over a period of time, these would slow down, but they haven't. So far, the biggest year that I can find is 2014, and I documented 34 cases that year that fit the profile. Now, it could be that the more visibility these get, the more I hear about. I tend not to think that's the case.
So you do think that it is a growing issue by the number of cases?
Yeah, and maybe it's growing because we're getting more and more people into the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people going to national parks, the numbers keep growing, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. It really is a fascinating topic and disturbing. I mean, and depressing in the sense that a lot of these have tragic ends. Before I lose you here towards the end of the show, can I ask you, are there any cases that don't end in the ultimate tragedy with a death or just a complete disappearance that people are never found? Do you have cases where people do disappear? They are a mysterious disappearance. They do fit the profile, but they end up showing up alive?
There are a handful of those cases, and some are really, really young children, and they can't speak. Others, there's one case I can think of off the top of my head where an adult disappeared in Arkansas. She was found days later, and the story of her disappearance and what happened to her in the woods is more bizarre than anything I could write about somebody not disappearing. And the doctor said at the time that he didn't think she was hallucinating, and he didn't think she had a mental illness. So what happened to her, we don't know. But there are a few of those, and in each incident, that people don't remember how they disappeared. They don't remember everything that happened to them while they were gone, but sometimes they remember these highly unusual things that happened to them maybe right in the middle of the incident.
Is that a common characteristic on cases that don't have that fitting of the profile where people are lost in the wilderness? Is that a common characteristic, or is that part of the profile of those that are found that just don't remember?
No, I can't say that it happens the majority of the time when people are found that don't fit the profile. I think a lot of it may depend on the amount of time you're missing, the amount of time you're gone without food and water, and then the more time you're away from those necessities of life, I think the more opportunities there for your mind to glare and maybe not be as sharp as it should be.
I can tell you, after I saw you speak, and you're an excellent speaker, by the way, if any of you listening have the opportunity to see David at a conference or an appearance that he does, I know he's doing quite a few, definitely do so. It's a very powerful presentation. I've seen it now a couple times on various levels, and you can see also his investigation and research progress. You know, every time you sit through it, there's something new, there's something fresh, that he is completely evolving his research, and that's why I give him as much respect as I can. Now, the website to visit David and get all of the information on his books, I have the newest in my hand as I talk here, Missing 411, Land, Air, Water. Just going through this thing, you can see it is incredibly detailed, very well researched, and is only one of 8 in the Missing 411 series. Some of the other Missing 411, including the Land, Air, Water, include Hunters, Off the Grid, A Sobering Coincidence, The Devil's in the Detail, North America and Beyond, and the list is growing. David, are you planning a book number 9? No pressure?
You know, I never actually plan these books. I kind of just accumulate the cases, and I have a couple piles in my office right now, and I kind of see where each year takes me. And I don't want to say that there's going to be a book number 9. Who knows? There might be another movie down the line, but we'll see.
Well, very good. Well, I'm going to link all of everything that David and I just talked about on the show notes page. If you don't know how to get there, it's www.theblackvault.com/show notes. That will break down all of the different links, including a direct link to David's documentary about his Missing 411 series. You can view the trailer. I'll make sure that's linked on there. I recommend seeing the documentary itself. There's some very familiar faces and voices in that. I think you will all enjoy it. And more than anything, be safe. After I saw David's speech, like I said before, the next time I took my little guy, my son Christian, who's now 4 years old, as we do this show, I held him a little bit tighter on that trail. I can tell you that much. Even though I do not let him veer more than 12 inches from my leg, I can tell you it was closer to 6 inches because I would not let him out of my sight. It is something that I hope all of you do. Do not be like that lady that David ran into when they found their child and just didn't simply understand the implication of having their kid run around in the wilderness. I am a lot older, and I won't say my age, but even I don't like doing that by myself. You always try and hike with a buddy. Follow those safety tips and listen to David. David, your website, CanAmMissing.com. That's CanAmMissing.com. That is your website. Your Twitter handle is the same, CanAm Missing, same spelling. David, thank you so much for joining me on the program and educating us all about a very important topic that I think we need to really look into more and figure out what's going on, whatever it may be.
John, I really appreciate the opportunity, and you take care of that great family of yours.
I appreciate it, and you too. Thank you very much. Although that concludes my interview with David Paulides, don't go away. Coming up, a newly released declassified document from the FBI connects back to a past interview on the Black Vault Radio. That's next on TBV Unredacted. In this episode's TBV Unredacted, I'm kind of going back into the archives a bit to my interview with Lee Spiegel. Now, just by chance, I actually mentioned him earlier in the program about our story that we recollected together about his coverage of my Air Force Instruction 10-206. Now, he joined me on the program, talked about that, but also more so, he talked about his connection to the United Nations UFO presentation that was given back in November of 1978. And he gave a great story about his UN card, that he was able to go into the United Nations, that he took part in this presentation to the United Nations. And it was a very cool inside look at what happened, because we know the overall arch of the story, but it was neat to talk to Lee about what really happened. Now, if you didn't listen to the interview, definitely go back and get that story. But what I want to talk about in TBV Unredacted is, after my interview with Lee, I went after the FBI files of Sir Eric Matthew Gary. Now, he was the former Prime Minister of Grenada that Lee Spiegel had worked with to kind of help orchestrate this entire UFO presentation at the United Nations. I had never gone after files on him before, so I thought, well, this would be cool. Let's see what we can get. Sure enough, I actually received at least some of the declassified files on Gary. It includes over 760 pages of declassified material and quite a few different things. But going through the records, I found one page specifically that was pretty darn fascinating. The FBI, a couple agents unnamed, because that is exempt under the FOIA, so we don't know who they are, it's blacked out. They interviewed Gary about a investigation on the sale of thousands of machine guns, which then also connected to a potential threat against Gary's life. Now, obviously, there's a lot to this story on the investigation and what it was. But in this breakdown of one of the interviews on page 4 of this particular breakdown of the interview, the agents were kind of chronicling, not a transcript, but chronicling the interview itself. What was spoken about, what were some of the details that came out, is there a threat, is there not a threat, is he in danger, so on and so forth. On page 4, there was a paragraph that mentioned the UFO UN presentation. But it was really strange. Let me read it to you first. This is a quote from the FBI document. Throughout the interview with Gary, he displayed a paranoid tendency, behaved somewhat irrationally, and made numerous statements relating to religion and God, which were not at all relevant to the conversation. He further advised that he had spoken numerous times before the United Nations General Assembly on the problem of unidentified flying objects, and was also a champion of other, quote, less popular issues. This particular paragraph was classified secret, okay? What was interesting was that the entire paragraph was circled, kind of a circle, kind of a square, a little hard to describe the shape, but it was definitely set aside in the sense that somebody had circled it and hand wrote in the margins, delete. They wanted the FBI's critique of Gary's paranoid tendency and the reference to the UFOs completely omitted. Now, although I haven't at this point read all 761 pages word for word, I was able to scan the document. I converted it to text. I do not believe, based on my going through the record and on top of that a computer search, there's any other reference to UFOs in this file, at least not yet. There may be more pages. I'm going after those. I'll report if I do get any more. The question mark that I have is, why did they want it deleted? It was a really out-of-place paragraph, too. When you read the other pages in this particular document that recollected what the conversation with Gary was about by these FBI agents, it didn't really make sense. Now, what am I to make of it? I really don't know, but I wanted to talk about this because it was a very interesting reference, and the fact that they wanted it deleted. There weren't a whole lot of other sections in this that were marked for deletion. The other strange thing is it never was deleted. That's the other weird thing. So they kind of circled it, and there was some crossed out lines in between the paragraph, but that's it. It stayed in. So I wanted to highlight that for you guys because I'm really trying to spend a lot of time digging in to these FBI files. There's a lot of UFO records out there, but there's a lot of UFO references out there that aren't discovered as easy. And so I've been sifting through, coming up on another edition's TBV Unredacted. I'll go into another one where I just recently discovered it, of an oral history that talked about a general and his interview. Oral histories are where they sit down a military personnel after maybe they retire or they're coming out of their duty, and literally for hours, that sometimes stretches over the course of a couple days, they do these huge oral history transcript interviews, and 400, 500, 600, 700 pages in length, and you find these UFO references. They're pretty fascinating. So I will link that in the show notes, www.theblackvault.com/show notes. This is episode number 14. I'm so thankful for all of you tuning in, and as always, making this your podcast of choice, at least for the last couple of hours. I hope you enjoyed the interviews. I hope you enjoyed all of the information. All of the episodes in the past, 1 through 13, you're listening to 14, all of them are available for free. No paywall, no asking of anything for you to access it. If you go to that show notes page, it'll break it all down, link over to every single episode, and you can just sit down and enjoy it. Thank you again so much for listening. This is John Greenewald Jr. signing off. We'll see you next time.